Fantastic. So we are here. This is amazing. Thank you, everybody. I envision more people will be rolling into today's session, but I would like to welcome everybody to this very exciting webinar, which is hopefully going to give you a better picture of how you can roll out your carbon literacy training at scale. My name is Farah and I work in the advocacy team. I'm also a carbon literacy trainer as well. And I'm really excited to be hosting such an important event today, which is really going to hopefully support a lot of you today that have joined in, that are either engaged in your carbon literacy training or have more questions about how you can roll this out more extensively as well. So just a little bit of housekeeping before we start. These slides just take a minute or so to move along. Just a bit of housekeeping. Again, thanks for joining. You do have a chance to ask questions when we allow the Q&A function box, and we kind of get that activated. So there'll be a time for you to ask those questions. And I'll also circle back to some of these questions at the end as well. You're probably tuning in from home. We all have internet issues now and again, so if it gets sticky, if we can't hear, or if I indeed automatically just kind of come out of the room, I have my lovely colleague Ted that will be picking up, but hopefully that won't happen. So yeah, just a little bit of housekeeping to get us started for today. So today's agenda, what does it look like and what do we have in store for you today? So we'll just be going into a brief intro of the Carbon Literacy Project. Of course, today's purpose is about the scale and rolling out the training. So you've probably already engaged with the training to some extent and already know a bit more of the kind of story in the context of CLP, but we'll dive into that briefly. We'll also be talking about all of those wonderful things to do with rolling out the training at scale. So the planning process, why is this important? And how getting organised is really crucial to that, to get your well-oiled machine up and running, to get your training out. So we'll be touching on things like who you should train first and how you can gain buy-in to continue the rollout. We'll be looking at who will deliver and administer the training and why that's important for consistent training as well. We'll be looking at how many people you should train and how you can better plan this to kind of start on your CLO pathway journey, to think about your long-term carbon literacy training strategy to gain your bronze, silver, gold or platinum badge. And we'll be touching on that in a while. I'll also be talking about what we can do as the Carbon Literacy Project to guide you and to support your delivery. So what we have in terms of helping trainers and the workshops that we offer. A big part of your training is also going to be looking at your marketing and your comms, how you target your marketing, the kind of people that you're targeting, and how you can maximise getting people on your courses as well. And of course, the most exciting bit when I stop talking is actually hearing from our guest panelists today, who have actually been fantastically dedicated to rolling out their carbon literacy training, who in some instances have carbon literate trained over 5,000 plus of their employees. So that's going to be really exciting to get to that point, to listen to that as well. So very briefly, what is carbon literacy? Now, again, you've already come across this. You may be in the middle of your journey, at the start of your journey. You've probably already tested and trialed the training yourself, but you'll probably see that it's working, that you'll see that actually the training is working, people are responding, and people are really serious in taking meaningful actions against and kind of to think about the impacts of climate change. The carbon literacy has grown. It's amazing, and we're seeing that at quite a fast speed. It is, in fact, the largest low carbon culture change project of its kind in the UK, and it is globally unique as well. We've just come off the back of a hugely successful CLAD, Carbon Literacy Action Day. So for those of you that participated, well done, an absolute success. And it's been recognised as such by the UN at COP21 in Paris, where it was awarded a TAP 100 or one of 100 worldwide transformative action programmes. Indeed, it very much is. And again, we'll be hearing from our panellists that will be talking a bit more about that later as well. So let's just go with a quick video about the story of the Carbon Literacy Project by co-founder Phil Corbell. So let's go with that.
Good. The Carbon Literacy Project started in Manchester as the city prepared its first climate action plan. And we were engaged in meeting various stakeholders to put that plan together. And we came to a realization that the climate action being proposed, and this goes across the world, was very much about things being done to people, not with them. It was all looking at supply side, not demand side. And we felt that was so lopsided that we felt we had to put something in action that could generate impactful low carbon culture, that level of engagement to engage whole populations in impactful climate action. So we approached employers, educators, activists and said, well, how will we do this? And we came up with our framework, the Carbon Literacy Standard, against which all carbon literacy training is now measured and certified. And this is what's being rolled out. And we did it in a way that could grow, that anyone could pick up. We don't train, we enable training. And that's been absolutely crucial to our extraordinary growth over the last few years. We have now trained getting on for 115,000 people across 35 nations. And we've done this because the thing works. We don't have a huge advertising budget. People come to us because they hear about its impacts, and the thing is growing and growing through our extraordinary community of practice. That means that people can find out about how carbon literacy works, and they talk to each other, they lend each other trainers, share materials across sectors, across countries, and that's why carbon literacy is growing at the rate it is.
Amazing. So you heard it yourself from Phil Corbell. Extremely important. And the words I think that you're hearing more and more are words such as impact, collaboration, making it your own. And this has been really the value of carbon literacy training. And what we do is enable that. We enable that through providing those tools. Just to emphasize a little bit more, why carbon literacy? It does actually motivate staff with the practical knowledge that they need to take action. We're seeing this shift in mindset. We're seeing people align climate action through the carbon literacy training with their own companies and organization sustainability goals, which do become a part of a workplace culture. The training promotes collaboration and creates solutions to share best practice. And more we're seeing that employees want to work for and be part of an organisation that puts environmental responsibility and wellbeing engagement at the top of the list there. So above all, and just as Phil said, it's not just about the science. It's about sharing. It's about sharing the knowledge, sharing the stories, and collaboration as well. So our reach, a little bit of what Phil had said, we're global, we're getting bigger, we're delivering in 35 countries and growing across 7 continents, and we are over 100k citizens, and it indeed is growing. So let's get into it. Let's have a look at the planning checklist. Let's imagine that people on the call today are engaged with their carbon literacy training. They've started their training, but they're actually looking to increase their numbers. They're looking to get more training, and they're looking to roll this out more wide scale as well. So this is where the planning bit comes. And we've just put a quick checklist on the screen today for you to read some of those questions. And that's what we're going to go through today. Have you thought about the number of employees that you want trained initially? What does that look like to you? Have you thought about who you will train first? So a good starting point are these kind of questions. So the number that you're going to be training, again, is very useful to look at your commitment and your carbon literacy plan and long-term strategy. You may want to take a staged approach at this, and that's something that we're going to touch on as well momentarily. Thinking about how you want to engage with carbon literacy organisation pathways and the processes here is also important. So another example, another one of these questions here, for example, have you thought about the amount of sessions that you would like to do? What is that going to look like? Have you thought about the amount of staff that you are going to use to actually run the carbon literacy training? All important questions. So again, like many other things in life, it is all about planning. It is all about thinking about these questions and thinking about looking at the drawing board, where you are at the moment with your carbon literacy training and what strategies you have in place. We have found that many of the large organisations have certainly succeeded with this because they have resources, they have planning, and they have a process and a strategy. They've got that commitment, they've got that dedication. They have those clear plans. And they also kind of understand how efficiently they can roll out their training based on these things as well. So this is just a starting point. Some of these questions that hopefully you've already started to think about. And if I just go back again, some of these questions that you can see, what kind of resources, what kind of systems do you have in place to, for example, survey the first cohort? So let's get into the detail with this. And again, it's not always about having tons and tons of resources within your organisation. Sometimes that's not always needed. It is having a starting point. It is starting the training, and then it's looking at how you can grow from there, potentially based on the success of that. So let's look at your training to begin with. Who will you train first? Let's get into a bit more of this detail. So let's say that you've got your course accredited. How do you decide who you will train first? Indeed, earlier on in your rollout, it is best to have a focus on the quality of training over the number. In the previous slide, we did think about how many numbers that you were going to train and what that would look like, but it is part of a bigger piece. It's part of a bigger strategy. Indeed, the quality is really important as well. So, for example, is it going to be a small group? Is it going to be a large group? And perhaps you want to engage and train those employees that are already engaged to some extent with sustainability issues. This might provide both the trainer and the facilitator with the confidence that can then build and set the tone for the training that will have quite a receptive audience. It's about getting the right people in the room, which perhaps we don't think about in the first instance, but that's certainly good when we're thinking about how can we target effective groups to get that training rolled out and to get that buy-in. So, targeting your training. I wonder for those today in the room, how many of you have thought about this? Have you targeted your, for example, leadership? And what does that look like? Those often in leadership will perhaps be able to action larger scale organisational changes. Of course, it's got to be bottom up, but the top down certainly does help as well. So they do have the potential to become carbon literate advocates across their organisation and allow that training to reach more people as well. They can also unlock potentially more resources to fund the support of the rollout as well. Again, as mentioned, perhaps members that are already engaged with a sustainability agenda, green teams, green leans, sustainability steering groups, etc. These are individuals who are passionate and driven and can certainly help again with that wide scale training and get that buy-in as well. Staff members working in carbon hotspots, let's say, procurement, building management, estates and facilities. These also will help with the initial efforts of getting that buy-in for wide-scale train out. And again, if you have no money, limited resources, we are here to enable that very first rollout that you have, using our framework, trialing to see how it goes. We've seen many smaller organisations also be able to apply for funding and also to, again, think about this in a small way and then see how it grows. We're not expecting, and of course, your goals might not be that you will just roll this out to scale in. And this isn't what it's about. It's about taking that stage approach and thinking about all of these things today. And again, we'll be hearing from the guest panelists on their reflections on this as well. So, running a pilot course. So let's say you've got your rough plan in place, you've got your course accredited, you've thought about training your leadership, and then you've run your pilot session. For most of you, you've probably already done this. You've got a sense of what this is. This is essentially just your first course that you've ever run, to get an idea and to get a sense of how it's run, how it's been delivered, and how it's been received. This is actually the secret to probably the most important piece of your carbon literacy training. It's important because it will help you understand what's working and what's not. You can go back to the drawing board, you can edit, you can reshift and have a look at how it's being presented, how it's being received. And I would say that processes to survey your post-course are actually just as important as running the carbon literacy training at whole. And again, we'll be hearing about this a bit later on as well. So running out your pilot course is really important, getting that feedback, getting the surveys. And again, the carbon literacy training, as Phil said, it works because it has to adapt and it has to be part of the culture of your organisation. We can only do so much, and it's really you being the experts in your sectors that know how your employees are going to hopefully respond positively to the training itself. So, who will run your course? This is an interesting one. We found that organisations who've dedicated staff members to manage the carbon literacy training keep that consistent rollout. Having a clear point of contact is also really important. Who is responsible for organising the training? Who is responsible for doing the admin, the delivery part of this, the training sessions, etc. And advocating for training quite widely as well. So this is kind of the internal trainers here, getting yourself carbon literate to begin with, hosting a session, and also to attend delivering successful carbon literacy training. We'll talk about that momentarily as well. Is important because we're going to be able to manage and look through what workshops we can offer and the support that we can help with as well. Also, it is about external trainers. So looking at actually, if you don't have the time and if you don't have the capacity, and perhaps if you do have a little bit of additional funding, then it would be very useful to potentially hire an external training body that can, again, help with the training. They can potentially help with your planning from start to finish, and they can support with that admin pre and post course as well. Okay, so these are just some of the bits that we are touching on: the who, the how. Also, you probably have questions around the certification process as well. So let's say that you've got your course accredited, you've done your first session, you've done your pilot session, and now it's getting speed, now it's getting traction, and actually you're in a position where you're running 14 to 15 cohorts. So how can you purchase certificates? Would they be in batch? And when would that happen? And also, how could you use your internal staff to make this process a bit smoother as well? So organisations, sometimes they will kind of order pre-batches of certificates, and that will often set certification targets as well to use up certificates at a pre-agreed date. Pre-purchasing certificates is also quite helpful and useful as well for trainers, administrators, internal or external. And these certificates can also be kind of divided into different departments or sectors of a larger organisation. And these are things definitely I think that more of you in the room will want to hear about later. And we have got some excellent reflections from our guest panelists that will be talking about these processes as well momentarily. So, again, let's say that you have started to roll out your training, you are committed, you've got a few of your employees trained, and you want to roll this out more widely. Becoming a carbon literate organisation is easy. And now we indeed have, I believe, the Q&A box that is enabled. So I think you can now ask questions. In the Q&A section. This is the Q&A section now at the moment, where we'll have both my colleagues Ted and Holly that will be able to answer some of these questions specifically to do with carbon literate organisation. I'm going to go through this in a very brief way, but you can continue on with your questions to them through this section. So just in brief, and again, more questions that will be answered. An organisation that has been accredited by the Carbon Literate Project, and having that, again, that dedication, that substantial commitment that's rolled through those processes, that's actually rolled out that training to scale. We actually support with how that could look like for a carbon literate workforce, for example. And there are 4 tiers to this. There's your bronze, silver, gold, and platinum. So when you have a certain percentage of employees who are carbon literate, they are able to attain this badge, again, to show your commitment to being carbon literate, to show, again, a reflection on those previous slides, to show that you've engaged with being this low carbon organisation, and that you are committed to that culture change as well. Okay, so let's move on to look at this in a bit more detail. So Bronze, an organisation that has been accredited and again, we've got the lovely Holly and Ted that will be able to answer some of these questions. To be awarded Bronze, and that as a CLO status, the organisation must have a training initiative registered with us and be actively delivering training. A CEO or equivalent level of leadership should also be certified as carbon literate. This is where you're able to gain your bronze badge. This is where it gets a little bit more technical because we've got a few more numbers in place here. But you can see to gain silver, let's say that you have an organisation, a workforce of around sort of 10 to 99 people. If you've got 40% of that number carbon literate, you're able to gain your silver badge. Now, we have updated this from previous years. So if you're sitting there thinking, actually, that doesn't quite apply to me, we have updated and we have renewed that. But again, you can get in touch with Holly, who is answering questions, and Ted as well, that will be able to help you a little bit more with the nitty-gritty on this. So gold, again, it looks, again, if you have, between 1 to 4,999 workers and 60% of those are carbon literate, you can attain gold. And platinum, slightly different as well, where you have those higher numbers, and the number of staff can be reduced by 10 or if 90% of the organization's senior management are certified, directors, organizational leaders, C-suite, etc. as well. Now, this is for usual, normal businesses and organisations, but if you are tuning in today from the education sector, this does look slightly different from the education sector pathways as well. This has been developed, and we have had different events and workshops on this, so you may be able to see this as well, or for those that have attended those, becoming a carbon literate educator has a slightly different badge and slightly different requirements as well. Again, in the same way, it does illustrate your commitment to carbon literacy through the education piece, through your carbon reduction across all elements of your educational institution, and again has those 4 tiers as well, distinguishing those different levels of commitment. So hopefully you can keep your questions going. If you've got more information on, or if you've got, more questions on your CLE educator badge, or indeed our CLO pathways, I've just put a couple of emails up there that you can make a note of. And indeed, there will also be a recording of this webinar that will be made available for those of you that didn't catch that. You can view it again in your own time as well. Okay. So we do have various other ways in which we can support with your carbon literacy delivery as well. We have ways that, for example, you can enter into our official badges, where if you have delivered a certain amount of trainings and cohorts, you can certainly apply to become an official carbon literacy trainer. The carbon literacy facilitator is the first instance, where you will go on, for example, our workshops delivering successful carbon literacy that are run monthly. You can attain that badge, run your cohort, and then beyond that, if you're looking actually to, again, let's say you've run 5 cohorts, you can apply officially with the Carbon Literacy Project to become a carbon literacy trainer. We have our CLP Pioneer LinkedIn page, which is really useful to understand, consolidate, and really have that collaborative conversation between trainers across different sectors running their carbon literacy training as well. It's a growing network. We have more workshops that are running. I do believe that we've increased that number as well. And so we do provide that support and that ongoing support for trainers, and for those of you that are wanting to upskill as trainers within your organisation as well. So I think we'll just tap into this briefly before we move on to the much more exciting bit of talking to our guest panelists. Marketing and comms. This is a really important bit. We've got, let's say, your course accredited, you've run your pilot, you know who you've been delivering to, it's gone quite well, you've done your post survey, leadership have given you a bit more money to roll this out wide scale, more and more training, you're getting more and more interest from different clients, let's say if you're a consultancy, or if you're a large organization, more employees and green teams are keen to run this out. Your marketing and comms is really, really important. So do you have a strategy in place? Have you thought about where this information is going to go? Do you have an internal intranet? Are you using LinkedIn? Are you using Instagram? How are you getting this information out? How are you maximizing on your efforts and your achievements of your carbon literacy training? What are your unique selling points? How are you going to get people onto your course? And how have you engaged in your sector? You may be a sector first that's got your carbon literacy training out. Please do capitalize on that as well. So these are all very brief points, but we're going to go into them in much more detail now as we hear from our wonderful guest panelists. So I will do a quick intro and give you a visual of who is going to be talking and from what organisations before we move on to our first panelist. So we've got Palatine, we've got Transport for London, and we've got the Environmental Agency. We will have Simon Dawes, who is the head of Net Zero and Circular Economy at the Environmental Agency, speaking first. They've trained, wait for it, a whopping over 8,000 people. That's insane. I know you're sitting there thinking, how is this possible? Can't wait to hear from Simon. We also have Nikita, who is the Sustainability Manager at Palatine, and they have had also an amazing cascading effect through their interesting portfolio organisations where they've trained around 295 people to date. We'll also be hearing from Anna Transport for London, Sustainability Manager, and Remy as well from Transport for London, who have trained, again, well over 5,000 people, very eye-watering numbers. So let's get to it. Let's invite the panelists. If we could have a spotlight on all of them, that would be fantastic. So let's do that. Let's stop sharing and let's go with our panelists. Fantastic. Right, thank you all so much for your patience, for hearing me talk and talk and talk. And really, I think everyone's here to hear you guys talk. So let's go with Simon. Thank you again. I know I did an intro, Simon, but obviously you've got to do your own intro for the sake of the PPT. We've had it off, but please do. Let's perhaps start with again, first of all, a huge thanks. And it's really important today, you know, we're getting the stories, the successes and the challenges of carbon literacy as well. It's not always, it's not all just kind of rosy, is it? So let's start with perhaps, Simon, what you value, what motivates you and what really drives you to take climate action?
Oh gosh, yeah. Morning. Thank you, Para. Oh gosh, what motivates me? Having a habitable planet to live on for me and my children. Um, but I mean, I've been in the environmental sector for 25 years. I've always had a really deep connection with the outdoors and the environment. So I've been working in the sustainability space for that length of time. It's just felt like something that's been deeply inside me, I guess. And I think probably most people on this call see the pressing need for taking action around that. I think you'd have had to have had your head in the sand somewhat over recent years if you didn't understand that. Um, but yeah, and carbon literacy has been one of the many ways that we have used to start addressing that in our net zero journey, which I've been leading for the Environment Agency. So yeah, the motivation's strong and clear, and yeah, I guess we can talk in a minute, but the journey that we've been on with carbon literacy has only reinforced that and given us more, as we've seen results, has given us more encouragement, I think.
Yeah, no, that's really good to hear, and it starts with that. We can talk about this in a kind of professional capacity, but it does start with actually what's going to motivate me? What is going to motivate me to get up and do this and to send that message out and to enable people to think in a similar way, to kind of take actions? That's really helpful and really useful. I suppose, you know, for you guys, you've trained. I don't know how I can't even say those words.
I
Like
think
8,000.
it's I think we're up to 8,100 have completed the course. I think we've got 7,500 certified. Well, I know we've got nearly 11,000 that have either completed or started their modules. We have 3 modules, and so yeah, so we've got a good number behind us, I think.
Eye-watering. That's an amazing number. And it probably just it sounds like numbers, but in actuality, that does break down to people reducing their carbon footprint, and that's what it's about. And so that's where we kind of need to be. I guess I wanted to touch on for you guys the planning process of kind of how you mapped out the start of your carbon literacy training, and what kind of questions came up at this stage. I know it probably feels like that was a long time ago because you're kind of 8,000 in, but what were those initial kind of questions that had come up? And obviously I've touched on those previously in the few slides, but actually I think, yeah, the kind of tangible questions of how that worked for you as an organization would be really interesting for people to hear.
Yeah, sure. You made a really important point earlier, actually, that when you're doing this and you're setting out on your journey, and I think Carbon Literacy Framework is beautiful that it provides you the opportunity to do this, and that is designing something that fits within the culture of your organization. So that's something we very much did, and we spent a long time planning what the course would look like for us and how it would work for us. We're an organization essentially of 11,000 scientifically orientated people. So we focused quite a lot of time and attention on the science and the policy and really making sure that was super accurate, super well referenced, et cetera, because we know from experience that people would quickly pull us up if that was wrong. I think the other thing we spent a lot of time thinking about was the tone that we wanted to strike through it. Um, Again, culture of our organization, we knew that it wouldn't go down anywhere near as well as it has done if we went in and said, look, we're all doomed, we've all got to act now. So
Yeah.
we tried to strike a really good balance between being factual, there's no shying away from the emergency we face, but actually being hopeful in that as well, because what we really wanted to do was catalyze people to take action. And I think if we left people feeling hopeless, they would not take action. So we really tried to strike a tone of hopefulness and point out to people or enabled people to think for themselves around what they could do. We made it super relevant to our organization. So we had lots of Environment Agency examples. So, we'd talk through a bit of science, we'd talk about through the impact, and then we'd say, and this is how that shows up in an Environment Agency context. And then just one of the other things that springs to mind, we spent an awful lot of time on making the course as accessible as we possibly could to make it really inclusive, to make as many people be able to access it as possible. So yeah, that was a particularly important thing for us.
That's really interesting. I suppose you've kind of, yeah, you tapped into the kind of course design part, and I think did that come about when you'd run a pilot course and then you'd got feedback? I mean, if you can remember if you did a pilot course or not, but did you kind of get feedback with people saying, actually, we know the science here, how can you make, and did you come to those kind of conclusions having done that sort of first few sessions?
No, it is a while ago.
Yeah, I can appreciate that.
We I don't think we didn't do a pilot course as such, but what we did do, well, depends what you call a pilot.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah,
We
different terminology. Your first course, your
yeah,
trial
we
course. Yeah, yeah.
we designed our sort of working draft, if you like, and then we hit amongst my team, we sort of wrote, and a couple of other people, we sort of road tested that, then we iterated it, then we went back to them, and then we iterated it, and we went back to them. And for all the reasons you've outlined, that we wanted it to be brilliant, we wanted it to work. We had a really interesting conversation with our chief executive, which was along the lines of he really doesn't like mandating things, and so we wanted him to mandate this course, but that's not the way he likes to operate. So we took the view that we wanted to make the course so brilliant that people would just want to do it. So that the
That's good.
feedback around
Good
the
way to do
business,
it.
like, hey, actually, this is well worth your time going and spending a day doing this. So, and I think that's where we got to. And I know you wanted me to talk at some point about how we led from the top down with that. So happy to describe that if you want in due course.
Yeah, no, that's I think that's a really important point because it is still fairly new, I would say, in the workplace, this type of sort of training for people to sit down and think about this kind of existential threat. But actually bringing it back to something that's relevant and in the context that people feel that they can get hold of, like you say, and making it bespoke in that way, I think is important. Also, because I guess for you and your organization, you're very science heavy as well. So again, how do you manage those things of sort of going, actually, we know this bit and we know that bit, keeping it fresh, I suppose is something that was probably going to be important in your planning. Correct me if I'm wrong there.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Um, and you've reminded me actually of one thing that has been a challenge, and I'll share for people to watch out for. One of the bits that we absolutely didn't foresee, and it wasn't a huge, or it wasn't a huge issue, but we had to address it, was that actually the course triggered eco anxiety for quite a lot of people because their rational brains like, okay, you've taken me through the science of this, and this is way scarier than I anticipated. And despite all that work we've done around hopefulness and you can get involved, and for some people it was quite I hesitate to use the word, but for some people it was quite triggering, and so our we were very clear we didn't want to shy away from the facts or the content around it, but we just had to put a little disclaimer at the start of it that was like, look, you're going to read some stuff that's perhaps uncomfortable for you, so just be aware of that. We absolutely hadn't seen that coming despite that iteration process and stuff that I described at the start. But yeah, that was one thing that was unforeseen that we had to deal with.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and we've certainly seen that in the training and the other organisations that we've spoken to. But yeah, I think like putting a disclaimer in and prepping people and contextualising it probably really helps with that. When you say, actually, this is what it is and this is what it isn't, and kind of bear with kind of thing. So that's super interesting. I suppose my next question is who you delivered to first, and how effective did you choose actually who you were going to deliver to? Was it actually we're going to go to the top here? We're going to go to middle management, and what did that mean for the kind of subsequent courses that you were
Yeah.
going to deliver?
I, yeah, thank you. I think this was really important for us. And again, it goes back to the point of it culturally, this was important for our organization. I've sort of touched on the fact that, we road tested with my team first, and we made sure that my team did it from the point of view, when we'd got the final product, my team were the first team to complete it because we felt like we couldn't ask other people to do it if we hadn't done it ourselves. So squared my team away, but that was really straightforward. And then we made a really concerted effort to make sure that the chief executive and his team, the executive team, were pretty much the first people to get it done. And there or thereabouts, within sort of 50 to 75 of some people were super keen and out of the block straight away, but we had to schedule a time in with the executive to do it. But for us, that was really, really important. And the reason it was so important was because I think we followed it up with a very clear comms and engagement strategy where at every single opportunity, the chief executive talked about it. We were in that sort of slightly post-COVID time, and through COVID, we'd had weekly all staff calls with 11,000 people. And that kind of carried on for a while afterwards. In every one of those calls, the chief executive was like, I've done my carbon literacy training and I'd encourage you to do your carbon literacy training. And and his executive team did the same down through their parts of the business. And we found that to be hugely powerful. And it was really interesting, actually, the amount of people who came to me and said, well, you mandated this course. And there's nothing of the sort. But because of that strong leadership from the executive down, which is, as I said, culturally quite important in our organization, and genuinely because, they said some lovely things about it, the chief executive came to me and said, I've learned more doing this than I've learned in years of being at work. and I took copious notes, and he often then tripped out little things, over the course of the next 18 months. As I learned in my carbon literacy course, here's a thing. And as I told these, I was at this event and I mentioned the carbon literacy course. And so I think that shows the strength of taking the time to put a really good course together. But also for us, it was just so important to have the chief exec and his team be real advocates for it. And then it proliferated through the business.
That's amazing. That just goes to show, I think, that that's that strong word across. And kudos to you for that. Let's get him to say this. Let's get him to bring it in. And also just that point of actually, and again, for the audience, I'm not holding cue cards to say this is amazing. Like, this is just amazing that we're getting these reflections from your organisation. But it's also, and you'll probably know from your extensive experience and background that you'll always get something new from the training as well, which is quite interesting. You'll always have that moment of being like, actually, I didn't think about that, or right, I know that, or perhaps I didn't, but actually seeing it in this way, I think that's also the beauty of the carbon literacy training.
Yeah, that's very true, actually. I mean, as I alluded to, I've been around sort of this topic for longer than I care to remember, and was involved with putting the content together. And even in that, there were one or two bits that stood out for me where I was like, oh yeah, I kind of knew that, but I've never really stopped to really think about it and put it into the context of what we're doing. So even for me, who should have known the content inside out, upside down and back to front, there were still bits that stood out for me. And quite a lot of people have said to me that as is available online, we put it online with our learning system so people could dip in and out of it a little bit. Quite a lot of people have told me they have gone back to it 12 months later to refresh themselves and go back to it again. So, we've had some people do the course 3 times of their own choosing. And I know even I've dipped back into the science module that we had and used that to refresh myself. So yeah, you're absolutely right.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Simon. Excellent. Really nice reflections. Let's go over to Nikita and Nikita at Palatine. I did a very shoddy intro of all of you, so you've got everyone's got an amazing background here, so apologies for that. Nikita, let's start with you. Let's start with, again, what motivates you? What are your values? Why do you care about climate action?
Hi, yes, thank you, Farah, for having me and for asking that massive question.
Massive. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, no, I think it really comes down to just like my whole upbringing. I think I've had a very strong reverence for nature, connecting with wildlife and just feeling very at peace in kind of nature and having that feeling of like wanting to protect that. But that was just kind of in the background. Went off, did something different at uni, was going to do this whole different thing, but then this calling for like what we're doing to the planet and why are we not acting quick enough, and why does it feel like people aren't taking this serious enough, kind of kept coming back. And that's what got me into this position and wanting to be someone who puts what I can bring to the conversation to the table, and then also kind of the environmental justice piece as well. It's really kind of really passionate about kind of enabling this transition for all people and not just the few, and not just few in certain parts of the world as well.
Yeah, amazing. And that drives you to your amazing achievements with Palatine and the organisations that you've engaged. I suppose from your journey, I'd really like to know about the kind of comms that you created for your training, both internally perhaps and across the different portfolio companies that you trained. And then based on that, your kind of targeted marketing, how effective was that to get people on the course?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's probably worth saying that Palatine basically invests in a number of SME type businesses across the UK. And that's where we've targeted our training. So it's not quite as impressive as the thousands of trainers from the other people I shared this panel with. But yeah, we've almost
Quality,
trained.
it's about the quality.
Yeah, so, and we've almost trained 300 people now, so we are proud of that. In terms of comms, we did quite a big campaign when we first launched the carbon literacy training to get people really excited about it. So our training was an industry first. So we were the first kind of private equity house in the world to train its whole portfolio in carbon literacy. So I think that was quite a good thing to be a part of, and people really did want to be a part of that. And then we held it just at the start of 2021. So that was kind of coming off the back of COVID. There was a lot more there were a lot more conversations and awareness about kind of the climate crisis. So I think we kind of came off the back of that, and people were engaged for that reason. And then we also timed it with Earth Day. So it was quite useful to just jump on some other kind of global action. And obviously now we've got Carbon Literacy Action Day, and there's loads of these kind of action days that you can coincide with. So it doesn't really matter what time of the year, there's probably an action day.
That's a really good point, though, actually. I think for many organisations tuning in, say you forget that actually you don't all, as an organisation, you don't have to solely do that marketing. You can time it and align it with the existing events that are happening throughout the calendar. So that's a really good point. I haven't really thought about that. And I suppose your pilot, did you do an initial course? Did you kind of run that, get feedback? Is that how you managed to kind of go, actually, we're going to include this, we're not, this is working, this isn't?
Yeah, so again, we kind of did, I would say ours has been quite iterative since the start. So different to Simon at the Environment Agency, we actually hold kind of two sessions over 2 half days. And they're on Teams, so they're virtual sessions, and that means that we can kind of iterate them every time, obviously keeping the core materials the same. And so kind of every 6 months, we'll update the materials and make sure the science is up to date, make sure the quotes and the stats and everything within that piece of the course is up to date. But then we have quite a unique position where our portfolio is quite general. So depending on which companies come and join that particular session, we'll be able to tailor the case studies and the things that we talk about in that session to those organizations, which I think, yeah, the Carbon Literacy Project creates that flexibility for, in kind of keeping those core learnings the same. And then I think this kind of feeds off quite nicely from what Simon was just talking about in terms of people feeling quite anxious, or like the gloom of the science and like the situation that we've got ourselves in. So at our most recent training that we held in September, that was a bit of feedback from people saying, like, please can we have some success stories, so we go out and we know that we can make a difference, and this collective action does work. So we have started to add those to the training as well. Yeah, which I think is just a lot more motivating, alongside the reason for acting.
Yeah, I think that's important. You're absolutely right that, as much as we can try and emphasize a hopeful message, but actually having those potentially those case studies in place to show that actually this is what you can do and this is what is working can help potentially, help people feel a bit more kind of, or less anxious. So that's a really interesting one. I suppose very quickly before we move on, how has the kind of general impact of the training gone for you, and that kind of cascading effect across your, it's quite different from what you do from my intelligence. You kind of have lots of different organizations. So, I mean, has that cascaded? Is it something that's like, oh, actually, yeah, we can see that domino effect of people wanting to take up more training?
Yeah, definitely. So I think the training speaks for itself. First of all, we definitely continue to talk about it, and we don't let people forget that we have 2 lots of training sessions a year. But the sessions get signed up well in advance, and I think that's because of the strength of the training rather than anything else. When we talk about the training, we talk a lot about the outcomes that have happened across the portfolio. One of our favourite ones is Gusto, the restaurant chain, changing all of their meat suppliers from Argentinian rib meat to UK rib beef, off the back of the training. And it's kind of actions like that that we talk about, we get other people engaged, and people want their case studies talked about across the portfolio as well. And just quickly, I've got one great example of a company in the portfolio who have decided to take the train, make their own course inspired by our course, become create a carbon literate facilitator within their business, and their plan is to roll it out themselves and then hopefully engage their customers as well. I think that's a great example of where there's that cascading effect of just innovation in how people can use it, and it can be a commercial driver as well. It's not just just doing the right thing just for the right thing's sake. With that kind of innovation and creativity, you can use it to bolster your business's whole kind of ESG and sustainability, which can support that commercial aspect as well.
Really important point. Thank you so much. Excellent. Let's move on to Remy and Anamim from Transport for London. Again, thank you so much, guys, for being here, and my brief intros that I did of yourself. But I suppose I'd like you, and I think you're going to take different questions, but I'll just start with, can you talk about, I suppose, the resources? You're, again, a huge organisation, a whopping over 5,000, these eye-watering numbers again. What kind of resources did you have to roll out carbon literacy? And how did that allow you to roll this out more widely? Or is that something that grew as the training grew?
Yeah, so I can start with that question. Thanks, Farah. In terms of resources, I guess the one that I think I've seen in the chat a couple of times in questions around funding. So around funding, really what we had in terms of resources was just enough to essentially fund certificates, as well as a train the trainer program for in-house trainers. So really everything else around kind of managing the program, scaling it up, came from a volunteer kind of led approach. So we had funding for certificates, as well as we ran, I think it was about 4 or 5 cohorts of train the trainer courses, about 8 volunteer trainers in each, over the course of the first year. And then we had a few others in kind of the pilot times the year before. And so we really leveraged having people who had been carbon literacy trained, and were really eager to become volunteer trainers, and we leveraged that kind of their motivation and enthusiasm to kind of create that resource inside internally in the business. But I guess the other really important thing was support from our senior leadership team and our executive committee. So having that commitment at the top became really important in facilitating conversations across the business about why it's important that everyone is taking part in this training. So as far as, really the resource, it came from down to people. It came down to having the right people in the right places and a lot of enthusiasm. We had about 75 volunteer trainers in the first year. And so there were trainers from across the business, had been carbon literate, trained themselves, and then volunteered, about a day per week to deliver training, as well as helping support, everything from approving and sending out pledges to sending out certificates. So it really came down to having the right people, able and willing to support us. There was also, as we were planning out our scale up, it became really important that, like you said, it's a really huge organization with a lot of different arms. And so it became important that we had people who advocated, in their full-time role was kind of supporting this program in their own areas. So we called them the carbon literacy coordinators. Remy was one of them, and she did a magical job in her own area. So it was really, really important to have people who understood their part of the business well, had those connections, and knew how to drive kind of impact locally, to create those specific program plans, specific rollout and marketing and comms campaigns for their own areas, and make sure that kind of happened at each part of the business.
And in brief, because I didn't start with this, but what motivates you? What gets you?
Oh
going?
Yeah.
That's
I mean, for me personally, it's come from I come from a background where I've grown up and where my family's from both have different needs in terms of energy, in terms of, carbon intensive resources. And so I've grown up seeing what a low carbon future could do potentially for people in, developed and developing parts of the world. And so really it's been part of my core mission around what I want my career to look like is enabling that transition. And so supporting carbon literacy has been something that came quite naturally, just creating that awareness and understanding of, at any kind of parts, the walks of life, a low carbon future does often look a lot better for all of us. And that's in terms of, having a more livable planet, like Simon said, but also in terms of what that does for industry, for economy, for people's livelihoods. So I think that's really driven me to help, to really focus on and promoting that future.
It feels like that's a very strong thing. I'm listening to you here about kind of the journey of carbon literacy, and that definitely feels very connected to you as well, the kind of personal motivation. Thank you for picking up on what people said. I know people said, we don't have a lot, we don't have money. How could we? That's a really useful point. You said, actually, you have volunteers, galvanizing your volunteers, getting volunteers together, getting, again, what I said previously, your green team, your sustainability team, that's going to be super useful. And it feels like that you've done that quite effectively as well. I guess the next question, we've got a couple of questions before we end. But how did you equip your trainers to deliver? Can you give us an idea of what a session looks like for you, given the fact that you have over 5,000? In practical terms, what's that look like? Remy, I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, Remy, you want to take that?
I'll take that one then. Thank you for the question. So in terms of getting the trainers on board, starting point really was them volunteering to become trainers. So if they volunteer, they're put on the waiting list. And I'll tell you why we've got a waiting list. Because firstly, it's important that a trainer becomes a certified carbon literacy citizen. So they have to go through that one-day training course. Once that is done, then we'll find time to put them, or they will be put on the train the trainer course, which has been designed specifically for the carbon literacy. So there are various train the trainers, but this particular one will be for carbon literacy delivery. So people who have volunteered to be trainers will then go on to this train the trainer course. They finish that, then they have 6 weeks between when they complete the training and when they deliver the first session. The 6 weeks is really for them to get acquainted with the notes and the presentation slides and the training notes, and also to find time to shadow a training session that will be done by an experienced trainer, so to speak, so that they can pick up some tips and how to deliver their training as well. Aside from that, we provide them with training materials, like I said, and then they've got the onboarding session with the sustainability team. So we have a sustainability team whose part of their responsibility or part of what they do is to organize the training sessions, the rota for the training session, to get people who are volunteers to be onboarded onto the program, and then they deliver the sessions in pairs. Trainers don't do their delivery solo. They always have somebody else to pair up with them, who is also a trainer, who also will have gone through the training program. And after the first course, so the first course they deliver, they will be shadowed as well by experienced trainers. So after they've been to shadow an experienced trainer, when they have to deliver, they'll also have experienced trainer sitting to the session so that they can provide any sort of assistance that they may need, but also to be able to give them some feedback at the end of the training session. And so those are some of the things that we do to get the trainers, up and running, so to speak. We also have catch-up sessions for trainers and coordinators on a monthly basis, and we now share knowledge about carbon literacy and things related to climate change and energy, and And in addition, the sustainability team every so often review the training materials that we use for delivery. And once they do that, they add on, whatever is relevant that needs to be added onto the training material. And trainers and coordinators then get trained on the new aspect that's been added onto the training slides. And that way, we've been able to maintain knowledge and be able to give the right information to people when we deliver the training.
That sounds like you've really planned that out, that you've got such fantastically sophisticated processes that I imagine that you've learned along the way as well through the amount of delivery that you've done. Now, Anna-Min used the word magic to describe Jeremy. I would say that too. You've been so keen running out this training. So what drives you and motivates you? Quickly before we end, I know we've gone over 1 minute. So what really
Okay, for me, very similar to Anna-Min, I think it's the energy side of things, because I grew up in a place where, clean energy is not the case, at least at that time anyway. So looking at how things can be done better, how people can become more energy efficient, because in doing that, of course, there will be reduction in our carbon footprint, and also about community, because communities make up nations, they make up areas. So if you're able to impact community, which through carbon literacy training, we're able to, individuals make up the community, and that way we'll be able to, on the whole, reduce our carbon footprint. So that's really my motivation in doing this.
And I wanted to end on that because it's about stories, it's about people. People make up organisations, and that equates to and amounts to the motivation that drives us to produce and create amazing carbon literacy training. So I just want to say on that note, thank you all very much for reflecting on your individual journeys of your carbon literacy training. It's been absolutely fantastic. And hopefully those watching today, you've been able to get a snapshot really of how you can roll out carbon literacy training more wide scale. Please do get in contact if you've got any other questions. It will be really, really useful for us to hear. I work in advocacy, so I support a lot of organisations with their rollout. It's been, again, absolutely fantastic to hear your reflections, the stories, the challenges that you've had, and hopefully it's been useful for everyone tuning in today. I will stay on for another minute. If those of you have got to go, then absolutely please do. We've got a couple of questions in the chat box, which I think some of our wonderful team are answering now. But yeah, thank you all very much. It's been an absolutely amazing webinar. Thank you for your time, Simon, Nikita, Anna-Min, and Remy, and for everyone tuning in. There will be a recording, and that will be uploaded onto our CLP YouTube channel as well. So thank you all very much, and good luck with your training. Have a wonderful restful Christmas if you're slowing down, or if you're not, if you're speeding up. But everyone have a very festive a great time over Christmas, and we look forward to receiving more inquiries and future carbon literacy training rollout as well. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.